A Trip into the Darkness. Chapter 12. Mallory jerked awake some time later with a scream escaping her lips. Fear coursed through her. She looked frantically around the room, only to find it empty again. Glancing down, she found herself still half naked on the small bed. Anger coursed through her, hot and wild. She remembered how he took her blood against her will. Then she remembered how he had used her body for his own pleasure, humping her into a blissful coma. She had been starving and drugged. Troy had taken advantage of her weakened condition. A moment of confusion and shock filled her as she remembered how he hadn't forced his dick inside of her. Even if he hadn't directly raped her, he had still used her. Memories of the extreme pleasure she had experienced from their time together surfaced in her mind, and she shuddered. How was he able to make her feel such strong euphoria without being inside of her? She vowed then that she would never willingly allow him to touch her body again, no matter how horny and intoxicated she was. Mallory swung her legs over the side of the bed and moaned as the room tilted to the side. Sitting there, she took deep breaths to try and steady herself and felt a moment of surprise that she didn't hurt anywhere. Troy was a madman out of control. He had handled her like a wild beast. If they had fucked, she knew she would surely be sore for days, even with her faster healing body. Standing up, she was blasted with an overwhelming sense of lightheadedness that left black spots in her vision. Panting, Mallory was able to make it over to the wall and leaned against it before slowly making her way over to the bathtub. She felt dirty and used. She desperately needed to wash him off of her. At the tub, she sank to the floor and turned on the hot water. She was hoping the bath would also help her sober up some. There was a reason she never got addicted to pain pills after her mother died, and she had her own place. She had opportunities to score them from other waitresses at the diner, and a couple of guys she went out with had offered them, but she hated how disconnected she felt from her body when she used them. She liked drinking because she was still somewhat in control of herself, and it made her feel good. How she felt right now had her feeling like she had absolutely no control, and it wasn't pleasurable. Mallory continued to sit on the floor in front of the tub as it filled up. When it was finally full, she turned off the tap and pulled herself into the hot water after taking the last of her clothing off. Relaxing in its depths, she felt overcome with a sense of relief. The hot water felt heavenly. Closing her eyes, she drifted into a light sleep. Coldness sunk into her bones, and she opened her eyes to find herself still in the tub. With a shiver, she reached down to unplug the water, allowing it to drain completely. As the water disappeared, she envisioned washing away Troy's touch. She thought about the goddess Freya and how she would never stand for a man abusing her like this. Both she and Mallory enjoyed giving themselves to others, and for someone to take it against their will was blasphemy. Freya, help free me from this monster, Mallory said to the empty room, trying to envision the goddess in there with her. She still wasn't certain if she believed in any deities, but any help to get her out of this mess would be appreciated. When the liquid was mostly drained, she pulled herself to standing and turned on the hot water to take a shower with soap. Rubbing her hair and body, she closed her eyes to keep the room from spinning and leaned against the shower wall to keep from swaying. Feeling mostly clean, she turned off the water and looked around the floor for her discarded towel. What she found surprised her. A pile of clean towels was stacked beside the bathtub along with another pile of clothes. Reaching down, she almost fell over as she grabbed a towel to dry off with. Next, she sat on the red rug to look at the clothes he had delivered while she slumbered. Were these here before I got into the water? She mused as she picked up everything. All the things he had left her were red, again, including the silk pants. She had a feeling if she ever did escape this bastard, she would never wear red again. Pulling on the clothes, she noticed the trays were gone and the mess in the room was fixed. Not that there had been much order besides her work clothes, but they too were gone. She also noticed a new tray of food left by the door along with a little brown box. Standing up, Mallory went to the door to see what was left. When she got there, she sat down on the ground and found that it wasn't a box, but instead an old book. Emma by Jane Austen, Mallory read aloud and felt confused as to why he would leave her this. She had never considered herself a fan of Austen's work. During the years he had she had spent a great deal of time studying the author and reading many of her books. The classic and famous Pride and Prejudice had been a required read in one of her earliest English courses at Toledo. Austen had been an English author in the early mid-19th century, and the old English book had been hard for her young mind to comprehend. The love story hadn't swept her off her feet either. The second book she read by Austen had been published much later in her career and had been slightly more interesting for Mallory. Still not a favorite, though. Examining the worn leather cover of the book, Mallory wondered if this was one of the original copies. She was certain Emma was part of a series and not the first book. The bastard could have at least paid more attention to the novel he brought her. Oh well, she thought as she placed the book back on the floor. Maybe she would give it a try. It's not like she had anything else to do with her time. Glancing at the food, she found a bowl of oatmeal with fresh strawberries and blueberries on top, and another bottle of water. Bored and hungry, she decided she would eat the food. If it was drugged, then she'd skip the next meal. Taking a bite, she found it wasn't overly sugary and had a hint of cinnamon. Sitting on the floor, eating her food, her mind wandered back to what had happened when Troy had last been with her. She remembered how insane and savage she felt until he drugged her. She had wanted to pull her skin off of her body to keep it from hurting, and her vision had been red. She couldn't recall any of their conversation until he drugged her, and then it only came back in bits and pieces. Straining her sluggish mind, she recalled him asking if she had any family. Mallory's stomach dropped. What if he found her brother and somehow used him against her? She had told him she didn't have any relatives, but there were always ways to find out. Lance had their father's last name, so hopefully that would make him harder to locate. Their mother had never been clear on what happened to their father or why Mallory wasn't given his last name like Lance. They had been married when Lance was born, but sometime between the birth of Mallory, her mother had also changed her last name back to Vander instead of Parker like her brother. Mallory picked up the bottle of water and felt a small sense of relief when the cap was still sealed. Maybe he was done drugging her for a while. She doubted it, but she could hope. Taking a drink, she began to grind her teeth as she remembered him squatting in front of her and taking a drink from her water. She had no clue what was to come at this point, but she felt so needy. My body is betraying me, she thought as she started to tingle. Mallory needed a knife so she could stab that bastard the next time he dared to come inside this concrete box.